The crystal wine glass felt heavy in my hand, an anchor dragging me down into the depths of the mahogany table. The air in the dining room was stagnant, smelling faintly of roasted rosemary chicken and expensive, unacknowledged tension. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, wiped the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, placed it deliberately on the table, and looked me straight in the eye. Her gaze was not hostile. It was terrifyingly indifferent. "My family always comes first, Evelyn," she said, her voice smooth and cool like a river stone. "You come last." I froze. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. I turned my head slowly toward my son, David, my David, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose college tuition I had paid by working double shifts at the library, whose down payment for this very house had come from the liquidation of my entire life's savings. He was standing right beside her, swirling the Pinot Noir in his glass. I waited. I waited for the outrage, for the defense, for the memory of a lifetime of sacrifice to spark some fire in his eyes. I waited for him to say, "Vanessa, that is my mother." But he didn't. He looked down at his polished loafers and whispered, almost inaudibly, "Mom, Vanessa is right. We have to prioritize." I felt something shatter inside my chest. It wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, structural failure, like a load-bearing beam, finally snapping under the weight of too much snow. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a clock I had bought them for their 5th anniversary. "Good to know," I said. My voice surprised me. It was steady, devoid of the tears that were burning behind my eyes. And in that moment, as the candlelight danced off the silverware I couldn't afford to buy for myself anymore, I decided that I would have priorities, too. And for the first time in 74 years, David and Vanessa would no longer be on the list. That night, driving back to my studio apartment on the south side of Chicago, the city lights blurred into streaks of neon red and white. My car, a 10-year-old sedan with a rattling muffler and a heater that only worked intermittently, felt like a cold metal cage. I parked in the lot behind the crumbling brick building I now called home. It was a far cry from the Victorian home in Oak Park where I had raised David. My apartment was 2 rooms with peeling beige wallpaper and a lingering scent of mildew that no amount of bleach could scrub away. From my single window, I didn't see a garden or a tree-lined street. I saw the flickering open sign of a liquor store and a dumpster that was emptied at 3 in the morning. It was what I could afford. Barely. I sat on the edge of my sagging mattress and looked at the photos on my nightstand. David at graduation. David at his wedding. My 2 grandchildren, Leo and Maya, smiling on a beach trip I had paid for. 5 years ago, after my husband, Arthur, passed away from a stroke, David had come to me with a proposal. "Mom, you're all alone in this big house," he had said, holding my hand across the kitchen table. "Vanessa and I want to buy a forever home, a place where you can eventually live with us. But we need a bigger down payment to get into the Lake Forest School District. It's an investment for the whole family." I believed him. Arthur had always said I had a heart too soft for this world. I sold the Oak Park house. The equity was substantial, nearly $300,000. I gave them $250,000. I kept $50,000 for myself, thinking it would be enough to rent a small place until it was time to move into the mother-in-law suite they promised to build. They bought a sprawling colonial with 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, and a 3-car garage. They bought a membership at the country club. They bought a new SUV. I bought a used sedan and moved into a building where the elevator was perpetually out of order. For 5 years, I was their ghost. I went over every Sunday to watch Leo and Maya while David played golf and Vanessa went to brunch or the spa. I brought casseroles, lasagna, shepherd's pie, beef stew, paid for out of my meager Social Security check. I cleaned their kitchen. I folded their laundry. I tutored Leo in math. I taught Maya how to braid her hair. David would come home smelling of cigars and whiskey, nod at me, and retreat to his study. Vanessa would inspect the kitchen counters for crumbs before offering a tight smile and a distinct lack of a thank you. I was part of the infrastructure, essential but invisible, like the plumbing or the Wi-Fi. But 3 months ago, the dynamic had shifted. I started noticing that my calls went to voicemail. When I asked to see the kids, there were always excuses. Leo has soccer, Maya has dance. We have a dinner party. I stopped going over on Sundays without an invitation. I waited. 2 weeks turned into 3. 3 turned into 4. The silence was a physical wait. When I finally called and asked, "Can I come see the grandchildren this weekend?" Vanessa had sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. "Better not, Evelyn. We have family plans." Family plans. The words had pierced me then, but I hadn't understood the depth of the wound until tonight. Tonight, they had invited me to dinner not to reconnect, but to formally excommunicate me. I sat in the dark of my apartment, the streetlights casting long, prison-bar shadows across the floor. I thought about the turkey dinner I had barely touched. I thought about the boundaries David had stammered about. "We need to focus on our nuclear family, Mom." "You're a lot." A lot? I was the free babysitter, the cook, the cleaner, the bank. I stood up and walked to the small kitchenette. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand trembling slightly. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It was the kind of clarity one gets after surviving a car crash, the realization that you are alive, but nothing will ever be the same. I went to the closet and pulled down a shoebox from the top shelf. Inside were letters, old receipts, and a manila folder I hadn't opened since the sale of the house. I took it out and spread the documents on the bed. The bank transfer receipt. $250,000. The note Vanessa had written on a thank you card. "To our new beginning. We love you, Mom." I looked at the date. 5 years ago. I picked up my phone. It was late, past 10 o'clock, but I knew she would be awake. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Barbara. Barbara was my neighbor from Oak Park, a retired forensic accountant who had spent 40 years tearing apart corporate fraud cases for the federal government. She answered on the second ring. "Evelyn? Is everything all right?" Her voice was raspy, warm, and sharp as a tack. "No, Barbara," I said, staring at the transfer receipt. "No, it's not. I need your help. I think I've been a fool." We met the next morning at a diner halfway between my apartment and her condo. Barbara looked exactly as she had 5 years ago, short-cropped gray hair, bright, intelligent eyes behind thick glasses, and a presence that commanded attention. She listened while I told her everything. The money, the years of service, the dinner, the words, "Your last." Barbara didn't offer pity. She didn't pat my hand and tell me it would be okay. She sat back, sipped her black coffee, and looked at me with a percent intensity that made me straighten my spine. "Evelyn, did you sign a gift letter for the mortgage company?" she asked. "Yes. They said it was required." "Then the money is gone. Legally, it was a gift. You can't sue for that back." I nodded. I knew that. I wasn't stupid, just trusting. "But," Barbara continued, leaning in, "people who are that arrogant usually make mistakes elsewhere. Tell me about your current finances. Who helps you with your banking?" "David does," I said. "He set up online banking for me a few years ago. He said it was easier. He helps me pay the bills. I'm not very good with computers." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "Does he have power of attorney?" I think so. A limited one," he said. "Just to handle insurance paperwork when I had my hip replacement 2 years ago. He brought the papers to the hospital. I was groggy. I signed them." The diner suddenly felt very cold. "Evelyn," Barbara said softly, "we are going to the bank. Now." The next 3 hours were a blur of bureaucracy and horror. We went to my bank branch. With Barbara guiding me, I requested a full audit of my transaction history for the last 24 months. The young bank manager looked uncomfortable as he handed me the printouts. I sat in the cubicle, Barbara hovering over my shoulder, and looked at the numbers. My pension deposits, my Social Security, and then the withdrawals. $500, $800, $1,000, $200, transfers to Venmo, payments to Lakeside Spa, Pro Shop Golf. It wasn't a massive heist. It was a slow bleed, a parasitic draining of the little lifeblood I had left. The total over 2 years was nearly $28,000. I felt sick. Physically, violently sick. That money was my safety net. That was the money for my funeral, so I wouldn't be a burden. That was the money for emergencies. He was stealing from me, I whispered. My son was stealing from me. With a power of attorney that, as we discovered upon reviewing the digital copy on file, was not limited, it was durable, it was general. It gave him total control. Barbara placed a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and grounding. We are going to fix this, Evelyn. But you have to be willing to go to war. Can you do that? Can you fight the boy you raised? I thought of the dinner table. I thought of Vanessa's cold eyes. I thought of David looking at his shoes while his wife told me I was nothing. I didn't raise a thief, I said, my voice hardening into something new. I raised a man who chose to become one. Yes, I can fight. We spent the rest of the day locking everything down. We revoked the power of attorney. We closed the accounts and opened new ones at a different bank. We changed every password. I bought a new phone so they couldn't track me or access my messages. Then, Barbara drove me to the police station. Filing a report against your own child is a specific kind of hell. It feels unnatural, like trying to stop your own heart from beating. The detective, a weary-looking man named Detective Miller, listened quietly. He looked at the bank statements. He looked at the revoked power of attorney. This is elder abuse, financial exploitation, he said flatly. It's a felony, Mrs. Clark. If we pursue this, he could go to prison. Do it, I said. That night, back in my apartment, I waited. I knew it wouldn't take long. David would try to pay a bill or transfer money for his weekend golf game, and he would hit a wall. My phone rang at 8 p.m. It was David. I stared at the screen. I let it ring. It rang again, and again. Then a text message popped up. Mom, something is wrong with the bank account. Call me immediately. I didn't reply. I turned off the phone, made myself a cup of herbal tea, and sat by the window. I watched the flashing neon sign of the liquor store and felt a strange, terrifying sense of peace. The bridge was burned. Now, I just had to survive the fire. The storm arrived the next morning. I heard the pounding on my door at 7:30 a.m. Mom, open the door. It was David. He sounded frantic, angry. I didn't move. I sat at my small kitchen table, gripping my mug. Mom, I know you're in there. The bank says the account is closed. What the hell did you do? I walked to the door but didn't open it. I spoke through the wood, calm and loud. Go away, David. Mom, open this door right now. Vanessa is freaking out. We have bills to pay. You can't just cut us off. You have my money, David, I said. You have $28,000 of my money. Use that. Silence. Then, a low, dangerous tone I had never heard from him. You're confused, Mom. You're forgetting things. You authorized those transfers, don't you remember? We talked about it. Gaslighting. The weapon of the weak and the cruel. I remember perfectly, I said. I remember you stealing from me while I ate ramen noodles to save money. I remember you buying golf clubs with my funeral fund. Mom, listen to me. You're not well. We can help you. We can get you into a facility where... A facility. The threat hung in the air, toxic and heavy. They had planned this. If I became too much trouble, or if the money ran out, they would lock me away. I called the police. David, I said. Detective Miller has the bank statements. He has the power of attorney. He knows everything. I heard him gasp. A sharp intake of breath. You called the cops? On your son? I called the cops on a thief. Now get off my doorstep before I call them again. I heard him curse, a vile word I had never heard him use. Then the sound of his heavy footsteps retreating down the hall. For the next week, the harassment was relentless. Vanessa called from blocked numbers. She left voicemails that swung wildly, from tearful apologies to vicious threats. Evelyn, how could you? We're family. You'll never see the kids again. You're a bitter old woman who wants to ruin us. I saved every voicemail. I forwarded them to Detective Miller. I didn't respond. not once. Then came the flying monkeys, relatives I hadn't spoken to in years calling to tell me I was being too harsh. He's your son, Evelyn. Boys make mistakes. You can't send him to jail. Think of the grandchildren. The grandchildren. Leo and Maya. That was the knife that twisted in my gut. I missed them with a physical ache. I missed Leo's messy drawings and Maya's hugs. But I knew that if I went back, if I surrendered now, I wouldn't be saving them. I would be teaching them that it is okay to use people, that love is transactional. I wrote them letters, long letters telling them I loved them, that I wasn't sick, and that sometimes adults have to make hard choices to do what is right. I put the letters in a safe deposit box. Someday, when they were older, I would find a way to give them to them. 3 weeks later, the district attorney filed charges. Grand larceny, elder financial abuse, fraud. David lost his job. Finance companies don't like employees who steal from their mothers. The story hit the local paper, small towns, even suburbs like Lake Forest. Love a scandal. Local executive charged with defrauding 7 4-year-old mother. The shame was public and absolute. Barbara came over to celebrate the filing of charges. She brought a bottle of champagne, but I couldn't drink it. It doesn't feel like a victory, I told her. It's not a victory, Evelyn, she said gently. It's a survival strategy. You stopped the bleeding, now you have to heal. But the healing was interrupted by one final attempt at manipulation. A month before the trial was set to begin, Vanessa showed up. She didn't pound on the door. She knocked softly. I looked through the peephole. She was alone. She looked tired. Her perfect hair was a little messy, her makeup less precise. I opened the door, leaving the security chain on. What do you want, Vanessa? She looked at me through the crack. Tears welled up in her eyes. Real tears? I couldn't tell anymore. We're losing the house, Evelyn. David hasn't worked in 2 months. The legal fees are drowning us. We have to sell. Good to know, I said, echoing the words I had spoken at that dinner table. Evelyn, please. Drop the charges. If he has a felony record, he'll never work in finance again. We'll be ruined. The kids. We'll have to move into a rental. They'll lose their friends. You should have thought about that before you spent my safety net on spa days, I said. She hardened then. The mask slipped. We were going to pay you back. It was a loan. Without my knowledge? That's not a loan, Vanessa. That's theft. She gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white. You are a selfish, hateful woman. You are destroying your family over money. No, I said quietly. You destroyed this family when you decided I was an object to be used instead of a person to be loved. You destroyed it when you told me I came last. Well, Vanessa, I'm putting myself first now, and that has consequences. I closed the door in her face. I locked the deadbolt, and then I cried. I cried for the little boy I used to rock to sleep. I cried for the family I thought I had. I cried until I was empty. The plea deal came 2 weeks later. David pleaded guilty to a lesser charge to avoid prison time. He received 5 years of probation, community service, and a mandate to pay full restitution. $28,400. He had to liquidate his $401K to pay me. The day the check arrived, I sat and stared at it. It was just a piece of paper. It couldn't buy back the last 5 years. It couldn't buy back my trust. But it could buy me a future. I called Barbara. I'm leaving Chicago, I said. Where are you going? Somewhere where I can see the ocean. Somewhere where the air doesn't smell like exhaust and betrayal. I packed my life into the sedan. It wasn't much. Clothes, books, the photos of the grandkids. I left the furniture. I left the bad memories in the peeling paint of that apartment. I drove west. I took my time. I saw the cornfields of Iowa, the mountains of Colorado, the deserts of Utah. I slept in motels. I ate in diners. For the first time in my life, I answered to no one. No husband, no son, no demanding daughter-in-law. I ended up in a small coastal town in Oregon, Cannon Beach. I found a small cottage for rent. It was tiny, barely bigger than my apartment in Chicago, but it had a porch that looked out over the gray, churning Pacific. It had a fireplace. It had light. I used the restitution money to supplement my pension. I joined a book club. I volunteered at the local library. I started gardening again, planting hydrangeas and rhododendrons in the salty soil. I made friends, real friends. Women my age who had their own scars, their own stories of loss and reinvention. We drank wine on my porch and watched the sunset. We didn't talk about our ungrateful children. We talked about books, politics, art, the ocean. One rainy afternoon, a year after I left Chicago, I received a letter. The handwriting was clumsy, blocky. It was from Leo. Dear Grandma, Mom and Dad said you moved away because you were sick. But I heard them fighting. Dad said he was sorry. I miss your lasagna. I miss you helping me with math. I'm 15 now. I have a girlfriend. Her name is Sarah. I hope you are okay. Here is a picture of me and Maya. Inside was a school photo. They looked older, sadder maybe. But they were there. I sat on my porch, the mist from the ocean dampening the paper. They hadn't forgotten me. I wrote back immediately. I didn't badmouth their parents. I just told them about the ocean. I told them about the whales I saw migrating. I told them that my door was always open, and that when they were 18, they could come find me. I gave them a P.O. box address, just to be safe. My life didn't turn out the way I expected. I didn't have the multi-generational home. I didn't have the comfort of being the matriarch, surrounded by adoring kin. But I had peace. I sat there, listening to the roar of the waves, a sound that has been there for millions of years and will be there for millions more. It reminded me that our dramas, our heartbreaks, are small in the grand scheme of things. I took a sip of tea. The air was crisp and clean. I realized then that your last was the greatest gift Vanessa could have ever given me. By putting me last, she forced me to put myself first. She forced me to find a strength I didn't know I had. She forced me to build a life that was truly, authentically mine. The sun began to break through the clouds, casting a beam of golden light onto the water. I smiled. I was alone. But I was not lonely. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I was free.